The Zac Taylor era of the Cincinnati Bengals has started with a loss. Well, I don't think we really expected them to go to Seattle. My name's John Popovich. I'm with Philip Lee and Scott Kyser, and this is the Flying Pigskin Podcast. Let's introduce ourselves. Philip and I were in Seattle first for yesterday's game. Philip was on the sidelines the entire game. I was up in the press box. And is it as loud as you thought it would be?
No, it was not.
Huh.
I think I told you coming home last night that I've experienced just as loud atmospheres in other NFL stadiums, so I was a little disappointed, I guess to say.
It was probably louder in the Scott Kyser household, where there are some little ones running around in that, or are they under orders to be quiet when the game is on?
Well, the first half of the game, they were actually running around. It wasn't until Mom took them to the store that I was actually able to get peace and kind of focus. So the first half was a little bit dicey, but I was very shocked at the way the Bengals came out and played. I mean, leading going into the second half. So.
Yeah. Let me just say this. Get your Bengals fix every Monday by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play. Also want to mention that Tanya O'Rourke is not with us today. She is on vacation. She will be back next Monday to follow up on the 49ers game. Let's take it from where Scott started it, Philip, and let's talk a little bit about I wasn't surprised at the passing. What I was surprised as the pressure the defense got on Russell Wilson.
The defense, I was amazed, and I've got to say, Sam Hubbard in particular looked like a completely different football player out there starting his second year with the Bengals defense. He looked a lot more explosive, aggressive. I mean, he and Russell Wilson were quite friendly there a few times during that game. He got to know Russell Wilson pretty darn well yesterday.
I thought it was interesting the first time I saw Hubbard get a hit on him that I was thinking back, it had to just be about a week or 10 days ago, and somebody asked Zac Taylor at a news conference, is there any player that you think has made great strides between the last year and this year? He said Sam Hubbard. So there must be something they're seeing as far as whether it's technique, whether it's size, speed, power.
You touched on it. I've noticed Sam has gotten a lot bigger since last season. Mm-hmm. So he's been hitting the weight room, and that looks like, at least for yesterday, that translated into on-field performance.
Yeah. The one thing is, and Scott, you talked about that first half, is that you can easily lose your composure in a place. I'm not sure. I was in the press box, so I have glass in front of me, so I don't have any idea of how loud it was. But still, it's very imposing. So I think it's 66 or 68,000 people. They're all dressed in this goofy green and blue, and it's a great stadium, that sort of thing. But I think it's really easy for you to lose your cool if you're coming from somewhere else. Your first game under a new coach, yet you survived those early series and that stuff. I thought the Bengals came out very poised.
Look, being a 49ers fan, they go up there once a year, every year, and it is not an easy place to go in and not only keep your composure, but win. And obviously the Bengals didn't win, but it wasn't at all how I thought it would go. You said you were surprised that you weren't surprised that the offense did what they did, and you were more surprised at the defense. I was more shocked with how quickly how the offense went, rather. Versus the defense, because the thing about Seattle is over the past couple years, once Russell Wilson signed that contract, their offensive line has slowly been degrading, and they've asked him to keep doing more and more and more. And that's not to take away anything from the Bengals defense in that front. Hubbard played great, but they stayed in the backfield, and that wasn't as shocking as 400 yards passing from Andy Dalton. I know this is no longer the Legion of Boom, but good God, it's not often that you go into Seattle as any offensive team and put up 400 yards passing. That was very impressive.
Well, they still have imposing guys up front, and they just added Jadeveon Clowney. So, I mean, it's not that they're anything to sneeze about.
If memory serves me correct, I don't believe they had one false start penalty.
They didn't
at all yesterday.
No,
which most people that was going to translate the noise, the new offensive line working together, a ton of false starts. I don't think they had one.
No, they didn't. In fact, I read somewhere this morning that was a point of emphasis. And to go there where there's all that noise and you're doing a lot of probably nonverbal communication, it's quite good. Let's talk about a couple of topics that we have down here. First of all, Dalton has that career game, 35 completions for 418 yards. That's phenomenal. But the way Zac Taylor talked about it, that's the way we had to go. They bunched things up in the middle. We had no choice.
Right. The Seahawks defense, they shut down. Their object was to shut down the running game of the Bengals. 34 yards, I think, is what they had on the ground yesterday. So Seattle got that done, and therefore you had to go to Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton had to go to the air quite a bit to move the ball.
Yeah, Scott, what I saw is really quick passes. That ball wasn't in Dalton's hands very long at all.
No, he got the ball out quick, and again, I was just shocked at how sometimes, guys would be running free in the secondary. If they were keying in on stopping the run, it's kind of odd that they stuck with that game plan after Mixon went out, and, they were handling the run, but it seemed like they couldn't do anything to stop the pass. I was very shocked.
Mixon left the game with an ankle injury. Philip, you said that some national reports are saying it's not really.
Yeah, just saw some tweets come out. It says a sprained ankle that the MRI came back negative and possibly able to play this coming Sunday against San Francisco. So we'll see how it goes. I saw him walking off the field after the game. He just a little bit of a limp. You could tell something was bothering him, but it didn't look like it was anything severe. And obviously it turns out it's probably not going to be. So
the game that was very interesting belonged to John Ross. 7 catches, 158 yards. And he only had 21 catches all of last season. The thing was, he made that one drop on that crossing pattern that he had room to run, and you went, oh no, it's John Ross. Then the next play, they threw the a 51-yard touchdown pass to him, something like that.
Yeah, that one, the crossing pattern that he dropped the ball on, there was no one within 40 yards of that guy. He could have turned around and walked down the sidelines and scored a touchdown. You're thinking, oh no. Next play, over the middle, touchdown to end the first half. Quite a bit of, to come back after a drop, the very next play, and you score the touchdown.
Now, the one thing he did, he said, I knew the mistake I made, because that was in the final 50 seconds or so, 40 seconds of the first half. He said, I was looking for the sidelines in order to get out of bounds. So he knows he took his eye off the ball. He's an interesting character, though, Scotty. When you think about that, he'll drive you crazy, and then he'll make you stand up and cheer.
Look, his playing time has been limited since he came to the league, so I think the most important stat we came away with is that he didn't walk away injured.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
And Eifert finished the game, so, hats off to them for doing that. But, yeah, I mean, obviously when Ross is healthy and when he, is out on the field, you can deal with some of the mental lapses because, again, he's played so sparingly the last couple of years. But he made up for it on that play. And the funniest thing about that play to me is that the safety was in a perfect position to bat that ball down or pick it. And he just was he was too far in front of it. He missed it by a hair, and good for Ross for keeping his eye on that pass and being able to, corral it and run right in because that was a fantastic play, and the defense was there to stop it. So, he's been much maligned, and for good reason, because he hasn't been able to stay healthy and was picked so early in the first round. But, hey, maybe all he needed to do was get back out to his collegiate area to perform like that.
Well, you mentioned the pass, and he caught that one. He caught the earlier touchdown pass off the flea flicker, and I thought that had decent coverage too, but I thought Dalton made a great throw that looped over. I don't know if that was a corner or that and Ross was able to catch that one. But Dalton had most of his were little flicks passes, but I thought he had some good throws too.
Yeah, he did. And just to quickly go back and touch on John Ross, I'm reading a direct quote from him here. Now I come in with a different mentality. What was the mentality under the old coaching regime? That he comes in with a different mentality. Was it you make one mistake and you're off the field? I believe now guys aren't afraid to make mistakes, knowing that they're going to get that opportunity to go back out there and prove themselves again.
Well, you recall even Zac Taylor saying that yesterday at halftime. Mm-hmm. He said, I told these guys, because there had been a couple of those mistakes that were obvious, he said, I told them, don't feel bad about making mistakes. Don't worry about that. Try not to repeat those mistakes when you go out there and do it.
Right. And when they hear that, they're not going to go out there and be walking on eggshells trying to do everything perfectly with that in the back of their mind. Like, if I don't get this done, I'm not going to get to play.
Yeah. Nope.
But going back to Dalton, yes, he was sprayed the ball across the field, a lot of 10, 15-yard passes, and then he let guys try to get yards after the catch. Mm-hmm. That looks like that's what they were trying to do yesterday.
Yeah, 8 different guys caught passes for the Bengals. Ross had 7. Tyler Boyd, I thought he was going to have 60 catches the way he was getting every pass. He ended up with 8. C.J. Uzomah, he did a good job, and frankly, he was the more prominent tight end, I would say, for in the middle of the field. He caught 4 passes for 66 yards. Eifert had ended up with 5 for 27. Most of those were little dinks off to the side, but maybe that's the way they're working Eifert in and making sure, we're not going to get this guy banged up by some safety who wants to take off his head.
Yeah.
Something like that. Let's go on to a couple of other topics here. Sam Hubbard, we talked about 10 total tackles, 6 solo, 2 sacks. They had 9 hits on the quarterback, so it wasn't all Sam Hubbard. Yep. They even had, I think Dre even had a sack.
Carlos Dunlap, he got in on one. Dre had a sack and everything. I mean, just the defense. This defense looked aggressive. Mm-hmm. Something that I don't think we've seen over the last couple of years was that aggressiveness. Yesterday, they were ball hawks. They looked aggressive and like they wanted to get back there and do something.
Well, I want to just go back to John Ross for just a second. I was just thinking about this. Remember, there was a thing that he had done, dropped the pass. Remember, Marvin Lewis was critical of him publicly,
yes.
Which Marvin rarely said was critical of anybody, let alone said anything. And you kind of wonder how far that goes, especially I think that was in his rookie year that happened.
Yeah,
and that may be something that weighs on a guy's character. He came out, he's about 21 years old, something like that. Mm-hmm. Heck, I didn't know how to tie my shoes when I was 21.
You know what they say, baseball is a 90% mental, 10% physical. Maybe it goes the same for football. Maybe not that much, but right. If you get that, if you hear a coach say that about you, it's going to weigh on you.
Yeah. Scott, as you looked at that game, what other things stand out as positives, negatives? Andy Dalton said we had a lot of positives out there. Did you see any negatives?
Well, before I get to the negatives, just to focus on the positives, the positives are that they outgained Seattle 429 yards of total offense to 233. Their passing yards, 395 to 161. I mean, yeah, they got beat in rushing yards 72 to 34, but when you hold Seattle, who these days is a run-first team, to 72 yards, that's a good day. Their average yards per play was higher, 6.1. They did some really good things out there on both sides of the ball, and when you're looking at a 1-point loss, this is where the bad comes in. I thought that the play of the game, and I know it happened right at the beginning of the third quarter, but the play of the game to me is you get the fumble recovery from Seattle at the start of the third quarter. Mm-hmm. Now you're in their territory and momentum. If they had scored there, be it a field goal or a touchdown, you got that momentum carried. But then they fumbled the ball right back. That to me was the play of the game because it sucked that what could have been in extending the lead there. It kind of brought things back. And obviously, they ended up losing by a point and they had the missed field goal. But to me, that fumble, after you had just recovered the fumble, was the biggest play of the game because, you had something right there where you could have had Seattle kind of, reeling just a little bit to force them to do something else to make a bigger play.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you, but I think that whole third quarter, they'd love to have back.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Philip.
And I believe on that drive where Seattle scored during the third quarter, had a dead ball penalty on Dre Kirkpatrick, illegal roughness after a play. That gave him a big chunk of yardage to march on down the field and score that touchdown there. So then bonehead penalties you got to cut out too.
Yeah, I mentioned in a tweet that it was a carryover from the previous regime. It was just dumb. But you think of that third quarter. Scott brought it up. They get the fumble recovery. They right away they go to Uzomah for 15 yards. So he's down to the 13-yard line, and then Dalton goes back. I hadn't really noticed that it was starting to rain, but I guess it was. But he says I'd never seen that happen to him before. Ball slips out of his hands and pops up in the air, and L. Woods gets it. Next possession, they go to that screen to Gio. He goes 35 yards down to Seattle's 39-yard. That ends up with Bullock misses a 45-yard field goal.
Wide left, yep.
Yep, that's a makeable field goal.
Yep.
And then go down later. That is where it was inside, about close to 2-minute mark on the third quarter. Gio, they get to 4th and 1. All right. My only problem is I am glad they went for it on 4th and 1. I'm not sure that's the play I would have called. They had gone pass, incomplete pass, 4th and 1, they go to Gio and he stops short. Maybe if you have Mixon, maybe he has a little more power there.
Yeah, I think if you different style running back, you probably would have had a better chance of converting that there. So,
and then I think the key play came 2 plays later. Seattle got the ball, and Russell Wilson throws like an alley-oop to that Metcalf guy. He goes up and gets it and gained 25 yards to end the third quarter, and that helped produce really what turned out to be the winning points there because they threw the touchdown as the fourth quarter began.
That ball seemed like it was in the air forever.
Oh, it did, yeah.
I thought it was going to get picked off at best and at worst tipped away.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. It had that kind of didn't have an arc to it. It kind of had a pop up in the air, like if you blew it out of one of those jugs machines at spring training. The way it went up, it was a tough third quarter. The other thing I had is like the personality of this team, and I'd like you guys to comment on this. Is they always seem to respond the next series. And when they gave up a big play, and there were a couple of big plays they gave up and they shouldn't have, but they always came back. It didn't seem like they stayed down for any length of time.
Right. As I went up and down the sidelines, you go behind the bench and you see the coaching staff. These guys were in this game yesterday. Even Zac Taylor, he was, when he wasn't watching the game, he was out along the benches talking to the guys, the defensive guys, the rest of the offense. They were in these guys. Just, you can tell it was encouragement. It's like, here's what you're doing. It's great. It just seemed like a different atmosphere. The guys, they looked upbeat, like, hey man, we're going to get this game. Mm-hmm. Seemed like a different mentality on that bench over there yesterday.
Yeah, that's what it was like in person. I'm kind of wondering, we don't get to watch that game on television, Scott. Did you get that same impression?
No, yeah, I did, and that's part of what I was kind of saying about, it's easy for things to snowball in Seattle because, the 12th man and how loud it is, and, they still have that, Russell Wilson and some of those guys left over from the Super Bowl, so they're still considered one of those upper teams, even if they've been knocked down a few pegs. And the fact that they just kept going with it, they never seemed to get down. They didn't look defeated. It felt like they were going to win instead of, okay, this is going to be a loss no matter what.
Right.
They ultimately lost by a point, but it felt like, hey, we're in this until the very end of the game. And I talked about it last week. There's going to be a lot of losses along the way, but all you want to see as a fan this season is wins each and every series, each and every play. And I think they showed that. They looked great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it'll be interesting how the fans interpret that. But I thought the same thing. I think if I'm a fan, I'm going to be a lot more impressed by what I saw out of the Bengals yesterday than me being growing up a Browns fan and seeing what I saw out of the Browns yesterday. And I saw just a limited amount of that stuff.
Hype doesn't win you football games, Popo.
Okay.
Browns were a great example of that yesterday, right?
Boy, that is true. They had, speaking of false starts, I think they had like 11. Something. Oh, it was a phenomenal. In fact, I guess the plain dealer, the headline was false start.
As false as you can be, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. Hey, another key moment of the game, and I don't know if you guys have thought about this. They're down. I think it's probably around the 3-minute mark, 3:15, something like that. The Bengals are probably a 3rd and 7, but they have that decision. Do we go for it? Are we going to get the ball back, or do we punt it away? Bengals decided to punt it away, and Zac Taylor said, I trust my defense. I thought we were going to get the ball back with more time. Your thoughts at that point of the game, whether he should have been punting or not?
That's a tough call. I mean, I think you rely on your defense. They had done their job. For the most part, the entire game. It's you against the clock at that point. It's just which one wins.
Mm-hmm. Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the defense had played great, and you figure, if we get one more stop, we get the ball back with a chance, and that's all you can ask for. If the defense had looked differently, then you could maybe second, judge it. But I felt like that's the right call in that moment because the defense had played well enough to earn the right to go out there and get the stop.
Yeah, and I think they got him to a 3rd and 1, and then Chris Carson busted one for about 21 yards and got the first down. Then there's not much you could do about the clock.
Well, and speaking of that play, Carson, he got into the secondary, and I couldn't see who it was, and I was laughing too hard. I don't know who it was in the secondary, but somebody got one-on-one with him in front of him, and it was one of those moments where you think, oh, no, because Carson is not a small guy. And whoever it was ran over and grabbed around his waist, and Carson carried him for a few yards. And it was one of those, that's just how it goes sometimes when you get to the secondary. Those cornerbacks and safeties are hoping that big guys like that never make it to them.
Yeah. There were still a few moments there that I thought we saw some poor tackling. There were a couple of plays there that one was a touchdown that Seattle went in and guy veered, and I remember 2 or 3 Bengals missed. So there's still some things to clean up, but I tend to agree with you guys that there were a lot of things. If you look at that game, you go, hey, this is a team with some potential, and he's getting the most out of it right now.
Yeah. I can tell you from watching multiple games yesterday that the benefit of not being at the game is it was sloppy football across the NFL, period. In fact, I'd argue that of the games that I did, watch, and pay attention to the most of, it was probably the least sloppy. So, that's saying a lot because, if people are looking at it and saying, well, they allowed 5 sacks and there's, 8 penalties or whatever. If you watched any of the other games yesterday, it was flag after flag after flag, touchdowns getting called back. So I thought this game was one of the cleaner ones when you're talking about week 1.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at week 2. Bengals open. Their home opener is against the 49ers. And if people don't know you, Scott, they know that you have been a devoted San Francisco 49ers fan. Is Bill Walsh still coaching that team, by the way? No.
No,
George Seifert, huh? No, Steve Mariucci. Who is the coach of the 49ers?
Kyle Shanahan.
Oh, yeah. Very good.
Oh, okay.
You, I take it, watched them beat Tampa 31-17. Your impressions of that game?
It was one of those games I was just talking about. It was ugly. The 49ers offense was pretty terrible. Tampa Bay, it was really one of those games where the score is deceiving. If you look at the score, you think, wow, San Francisco must have handled them. But they scored 2 defensive touchdowns. Jameis Winston looked awful. It was really who's going to, make one less mistake than the other team throughout, and it just so happened that, the 49ers made fewer mistakes, but it was not a good football game to watch. You take W's, but I walked away thinking they're not going to beat many more teams if they play like that throughout the rest of the season.
Okay, Scott, take what you saw yesterday with the 49ers and take what you saw with the Bengals yesterday. Compare and contrast. What's going to work for the Bengals against the Niners and vice versa?
Well, I'm going to say here's the problem. Kyle Shanahan usually dedicates a lot to the running game. And usually the offensive line, as far as the running, he's like his father, where, they can pick a running back up off of the street, those old Denver offenses that Mike Shanahan run, and, he turn anyone into a star. Kyle Shanahan runs a similar offense. The problem was yesterday, the running game never seemed to get going. Garoppolo in his first game back from the ACL tear last year, looked tentative, and he was pretty rusty. The wide receivers were horrible. So the offense as a whole, if they play anything like they did against Tampa Bay, they're going to struggle again. The good news is that the defense, which has been lacking since they went to the Super Bowl pretty much, and all of the guys started leaving and retiring, and Justin Smith and Patrick Willis and those guys stepped it up, and they carried the team. And the front four and the front seven in general, but the front four, that defensive line is going to be a problem as advertised. Everybody around here is familiar with the Bosa family, and Nick Bosa got his first NFL sack in his first career game in limited time on the field, and him and D Ford coming off of each of the edges, that's going to be a real problem. And people will say, well, Seattle's defensive line is not what it once was, and San Francisco's is better. So if Cincinnati is going to have the same type of success on offense, they're going to need to shore up, the offensive line in a hurry, because these guys are coming, and that was the key to the victory this week, was the fact that the 49ers could finally get pressure. So I tend to think that it's going to be a similar type of scoring thing where it's not going to be high on either side. You could see maybe Dalton put up numbers, but I don't think that if you're looking for 400 yards again, you'll be sadly disappointed.
Yeah. So Dalton only got sacked twice yesterday. Quentin Jefferson had both of those.
Yeah.
But I thought other than that, they didn't really get much pressure on him. So that offensive line, at least in the pass blocking scheme, did their job pretty well.
And Quentin Jefferson was being blocked by Andre Smith, who is a substitute. Hopefully Cordy Glenn is back. But Quentin Jefferson was a bit of a force because he had the sacks, and I think he had a couple of knockdowns or deflections too.
He did, yep.
And so he was involved pretty good. Okay, before we say goodbye, let's swing around the AFC North a little bit here, and let's start in Cleveland since we touched on that a little bit. When they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated, I tweeted "Kiss of Death" right there, and I just got a feeling that a lot of people have looked at what the Browns did well, especially what Baker Mayfield did last year, and they have figured it out. Now it's up for the Browns to respond to that and do a reply. Scott, you want to start that?
Yeah, the problem I thought about with the Browns, and I thought they'll challenge for the playoffs in the division, but is that they spent the entire offseason listening to their hype and getting excited, and there's still a lot of question marks. And when you're a team that's been assembled in the way that the Browns have, where Dorsey has gone out and brought a bunch of guys in, this franchise and these guys that have never played together, they still have to learn how to win, and that was on full display yesterday. It doesn't matter how many all-stars or Pro Bowlers you bring in, you still have to put it all together, and you still have to play the game. Nobody is going to hand the Browns anything, and if anything, because other teams have spent the offseason hearing about the Browns, I'm sure that the Titans, who everybody said had no chance going into Cleveland, they took that personally, and that's what the Browns are going to get now. Unlike before, they're going to get everybody's best week in and week out, and they better be ready. And yesterday they weren't. So you hope, if you're a Browns fan, that it was just week one and they get the kinks out, and maybe now that they've played that first game, they know nothing's going to be handed to them.
Yeah, I believe that the hype fuels the fire to the opponent. So, as the old bulletin board, the locker room material, now it's, on the internet and TV and stuff like that. So, yeah, sure, the Titans went in there with a chip on their shoulder and said, yeah, boys, we're just as good as you are.
Yep. And it's Cleveland against the Jets next Monday night in the first of, I think, several times the networks have stuck the Browns now on prime time. And a couple of executives yesterday went, oh, son of a gun, what did we do? We believed all that hype, too. Let's go last night. Pittsburgh just got wiped off the map by New England. It's one thing to get beat in New England. That's a terrible place to start your season. But to not score a touchdown, I thought we were watching it on the plane.
Yeah, a little bit on the plane last night coming back, and then I switched over and watched the Yankees and the Red Sox because I'd seen enough football for the day. But yeah, I heard him talking about how Pittsburgh is trying to transition to this man defensive scheme, and I was like, well, there's signs of improvement, but they've still got a long way to go. Long way to go is definitely the key word there because they look terrible.
Yeah. Scott, you watched that game last night?
I had to get to bed to be to work at 1:30 in the morning, but so I was only up for just a little bit of it. But the problem with the Steelers is, at some point it was going to catch up with them. They've gotten rid of Emmanuel Sanders, they've got rid of Antonio Brown, and you having to be the guy. It's easier to be the guy that nobody's keying in on. And so that's what I saw. Now they have to live life without, Le'Veon Bell is gone. And so eventually that type of stuff catches up with you. And I don't think a lot of it because it was in New England and, that they're a walking cheat code. So it is what it is with them. But, the Steelers are going to have to figure out how to operate without guys that are household names across the league. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. But I have full confidence that they'll figure it out next week.
Yeah, I was hearing a little bit last night too, and I heard one of the announcers talk about not a player left, but Mike Munchak, their longtime offensive line coach, left, and I'm not sure where he went. I think he might have gone to Arizona, but that has also made a big deal. They were putting together a ragtag group of offensive lines over the years, but they always seem to get something out of it.
And is Ben Roethlisberger still Ben Roethlisberger? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, that's another question
I would
we need to look at.
One thing about that is, one, I won't count Ben out, and two, if you look at a split the last 4 or 5 years, Ben on the road is a completely different quarterback than Ben at home. Yeah. So if they go home and they look the same, then I would say you hit the red alert button if you're a Steelers fan. But I just chalk this up to starting, the Patriots unfurling another banner, and they're at home, and they just signed Antonio Brown, and yada, 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 the same things they already do.
A new hoodie for the season for Coach Belichick. I mean, it looked fresh out of the wrapper, didn't it?
Of course. I don't put too much stock into it if I'm a Steelers fan. It's like, well, sometimes you just get beat and you hope that next week they come back all right. So.
Yeah. Well, next week I believe they are at home, and I believe it's the Seahawks that come into play.
It is. Them. Yeah, so,
Seahawks. So that'll be a good interesting. Okay, now Cleveland played a real team. Pittsburgh played a real team, and the Bengals played a real team. Baltimore played the Dolphins.
I want to be traded.
And I only saw that score. I swear I looked up. I finished my first cup of coffee, and it was 35-3 or something like that. It must have been just horrible. Great, I guess, if you're a Ravens fan.
And no matter how bad your season is going, you can say, well, at least I don't play for the Dolphins, right?
Yeah.
When I saw a tweet this morning, 15 players said they wanted to be traded.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what I saw this morning. I'm like, really? These guys, after one game, players want to get traded. So that tells you how bad things are in Miami right now.
Wow.
And if Ryan Fitzpatrick is your starting quarterback, what does that say about your organization right now? Really no knock against him, but he's a great backup. He's not a starting quarterback.
That's right. And you think of all the years they've had trying to find quarterback, and they still haven't settled on anybody.
Nobody.
No. And so, Scott, did you watch that game at all?
I caught a little bit of it, but once it got out of hand, there was no sense in watching it. The thing about the Dolphins is there's been times where you could say, well, going into a year, this team is tanking, or this team is probably going to be playing for a top 5 draft pick. This is the first time, I think, where it was blatantly obvious before the season started that they were going all in. And they can say whatever they want about how they're not tanking and yada, yada, yada. But if the players, are asking for trades after the game, they're in the locker room, they know exactly the temperature of everything going on there. It ain't going to get any better for Miami. So, but if you're the Ravens, you got to play the team in front of you. So
that's right.
I'm not taking anything away from them because, there's winning a game and then there's blowing out a game. That was one of those Alabama playing, McNeese State in week 13 in the end of the college season just before things ramp up for the playoffs where they just beat the brakes off of them. And it's like, you know what? That's why, you have to do that. We'd be talking about, what are the Ravens if, they had only beat them by a touchdown or whatever. But, hey, if you're the rest of the AFC North, what the Ravens put on tape, you gotta account for that. And good for Lamar Jackson. He's taken a lot of crap the last year and a half.
That's right.
Ever since that playoff game. And I, for one, have always been a Lamar Jackson fan, and, him coming in halfway through last year, they designed the offense around his strengths. He had an entire off season to, get better as a passer, and I don't think that was just because he was playing against the Dolphins. Now, I don't think he's going to throw 6 touchdown passes a game or whatever it was, but I do think that Lamar Jackson deserves credit and that they're going to be, a lot better as a passing team than people thought they would be coming into the season.
A lot of questions around Lamar Jackson when he came into the league last year. Could he play quarterback in the NFL coming out of University of Louisville? Well, so far he's proven that he can. And, only time will tell as he meets, tougher defense. Like Scott said, you had to play the Dolphins. You put the numbers up, But we'll see as he progresses along in the season and goes up against some tougher defense. But I think the guy is talented, and he's got a bright future ahead of him in this league, I believe.
Good deal. Well, I'll tell you what, I heard him yesterday after the game. Somebody mentioned his stats, and he says, not bad for a running back, huh? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he knows what it's out there. So let me again remind our listeners that you can get your Bengals fix on this Flying Pigskin podcast every Monday by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play. So I want to thank Philip. I know you and I didn't pull in here till 2 a.m.
I had to hit the bed at 3 a.m.
Yeah, so did I. So I was wondering how this. And Scotty, thank you, because I know you were in work almost that time. So for you to be able to call in at this time, that's just really a great help. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. I love doing this, and I'm looking forward. I will be at the game this Sunday, so I'll have plenty to talk about next Monday.
Very good. Tanya will be back next Monday. Well, hopefully she's enjoying herself on vacation. And thank you for listening, for sharing some time with us. And let's go Bengals this Sunday against the 49ers. Have a good one, everybody.
Brewed.